The folder slid across the table with a sound that was heavier than it should have been. It wasn't just paper. It was a verdict, a pre-written ending to a story I didn't know I was in. In that cold, sterile conference room, I knew this wasn't about improvement. This was a corporate execution. It started a week earlier, with the simplest act of rebellion. I started leaving at 5. I wasn't slacking off. My work was done, and done well. But in the corporate world, finishing your work isn't the point. The performance of suffering is. Brenda from HR used a carefully rehearsed, gentle voice, the kind they teach you in a seminar called Managing Difficult Conversations. She was a master of weaponized empathy. It's a tool designed to make you lower your guard right before they deliver the blow. Alex, we just have some concerns about your engagement and cultural fit. Cultural fit is just corporate code for obedience. Engagement is their word for your willingness to sacrifice your personal life for their bottom line. It was an accusation disguised as a wellness check. And I finally understood. This wasn't a discussion about my work. It was a ritual. It was a performance they had to act out for legal reasons before they could get rid of me. This wasn't a discussion. It was a courtroom. The company was the judge, the prosecutor, and the jury. My fate had been decided long before I walked in the door. And I was the one on trial. In their eyes, my desire for a life outside of work was a crime for which I had already been found guilty. The document was a masterpiece of vague nonsense. It was filled with unmeasurable goals and subjective metrics. It was corporate poetry written by the legal department. Goals like demonstrate more passion and improve team morale. How do you measure passion in a spreadsheet? You can't. That's the whole point. It wasn't designed for me to succeed. It was a net woven from ambiguity, a trap where any outcome could be interpreted as failure. It was designed to be my signature on my own termination letter. Every week I failed to meet their impossible standards would be another nail in my corporate coffin. They weren't just building a case, they were asking me to hand them the hammer. The old me would have panicked or quit. I would have worked myself to the bone trying to prove them wrong and burned out in the process. He would have played their game and lost. But the new me decided to play their game, but with my own rules. The system runs on bureaucracy and documentation, so I decided to give them more of it than they ever wanted. My first move was an email. It wasn't a complaint or an argument. It was a request for clarification, the most dangerous weapon in a professional's arsenal. It was polite, professional, and full of questions. I embraced their game of corporate theater with a strategy of radical professionalism. I would be the perfect compliant employee they claimed they wanted. To ensure I can meet these goals, could you please provide specific, measurable examples for increasing my visibility? For instance, should I be presenting in more meetings or sending out more update emails? A clear target would be very helpful. I was turning their vague weapon back on them. By asking for specifics, I was forcing them to either invent a concrete metric they could be held to or admit the goal was meaningless. Incompetent managers hate being forced to do their job. The boss's reply was short and dismissive. They hate clarity because it creates accountability. Vagueness is the shield of the incompetent. Let's discuss in our next one-on-one. This is a classic delay tactic. It's designed to move the conversation from a documented email chain into an unrecorded, deniable conversation. For the next month, I became the most diligent employee they'd ever seen. I wasn't working harder or longer. I was just working with extreme precision, creating a fortress of evidence around myself. Every verbal instruction from my boss was followed by a confirmation email. It was a simple, polite, non-confrontational way of saying, I am creating a record of this. It forces them to be honest or be silent. Hi, boss. Just to confirm our discussion from a moment ago. These became the most powerful words in my vocabulary. They transform a whisper in the hallway into a piece of evidence. A paper trail is a shield against gaslighting. Predictably, he stopped giving me verbal instructions. My polite requests for clarity made his lazy management style impossible to maintain. He was forced to communicate through email, where his words could be tracked and questioned. I sent a weekly progress report to him and Brenda, bullet pointing every single one of my achievements against their written goals. I didn't just meet their expectations. I provided a weekly receipt proving that I had. The paper trail was becoming a fortress. I also politely noted which goals were still pending his clarification. I wasn't blaming him. I was simply documenting the fact that I couldn't proceed without his input. I was making my problem his problem. The system was short-circuiting. My refusal to be a victim was breaking their script. They had no process for an employee who calmly and professionally complied their way out of a trap. They couldn't fire a perfect, hyper-documented employee without risking a lawsuit, so they decided to set one last, impossible trap. This was their final, desperate move to make me quit. It was 4 p.m. on the last Friday of the PEP. He walked over to my desk, his posture artificially casual. He was trying to look like a friendly colleague, not an executioner. Hey, Alex, small thing, he said. In the language of bad managers, small thing is always code for a giant, unreasonable request designed to ruin your evening. It's never, ever a small thing. I need a full competitive analysis report, needed first thing Monday morning. He dropped a stack of paper on my desk that was at least 3 inches thick. This wasn't a task, it was a punishment. It was the perfect trap. A beautifully constructed no-win scenario. He wasn't testing my skills anymore. He was testing my breaking point. If I said no, I was insubordinate. On the final day of my PIP, a direct refusal of a task would be grounds for immediate termination. He would have won. If I said yes and failed, I was incompetent. He could triumphantly march to HR on Monday and declare that I couldn't handle the workload. He would have documented proof of my failure. If I worked all weekend and succeeded, I broke, and he owned me again. I would prove that when push comes to shove, I would sacrifice my life for the job. My boundaries would be meaningless, and he would know he could do it again anytime he wanted. But they forgot something. They assumed I was still playing their game of emotional manipulation and fear. They didn't realize I had switched to a different game entirely. While they were watching me for any sign of weakness, I was studying them. I was learning their playbook, their tells, their dependencies. I was learning the game. I looked at the pile of papers, then looked at my boss. I gave him a polite, professional smile. Then I turned to my computer and started typing. Happy to start on this, the email began. You always lead with agreement. It's disarming and shows you're not being confrontational. You're just being a good, logical employee. Based on a quick review, this looks like about 20 hours of focused work. This isn't a complaint, it's a professional estimate. It transforms his unreasonable demand into a simple math problem. To have it done by Monday, which of my other high-priority PIP projects should I officially deprioritize? This was the checkmate. I was using the weapon he gave me, the PIP, as my shield. I was forcing him, on the record, to admit that his new request was more important than the improvement plan he himself signed off on. He was silent. There was no script for this. His trap had a fatal flaw. It relied on me being emotional, not logical. He had no response. That weekend, I didn't think about the report once. He never replied to the email. The project was never mentioned again. It was 5:01 p.m., and my time was mine. I went for a hike. I read a book. For the first time in months, Sunday night didn't come with a feeling of dread. It came with a feeling of peace. They wanted a soldier who would fall on his sword. They wanted me to believe their emergency was my responsibility. Their entire system is built on the assumption that you will sacrifice yourself for their convenience. But I gave them something they didn't have a script for. A professional who knew his contract, documented the facts, and built a shield out of their own bullshit.